Welcome back. The topic for today is Yusef Lateef's Atlantis Lullaby, the concert from Avignon. So this is slated for Record Store Day coming up in just a couple of weeks. I've listened to the whole thing and I kind of want to give you a rundown, tell you about the release and whether I think it's a worthwhile grab for you. As always, before we get started, hit like, hit subscribe, consider following me on Instagram at what_can_brown. And the other thing is that I've got my fourth round of auctions, jazz record auctions on eBay that are going to be starting pretty soon. So you can go over there and follow my store. It's easy to remember. It's WCB Jazz Vinyl. All right, so you may ask yourself, how is it that I have a copy of this title? Well, the folks at Elemental/Resonance/labels that Zev Feldman is involved with sent me some of the titles, much like others in the YouTube vinyl community. I'm sure you've seen some of those other videos already. I am making one video for each of these releases because I do want to dive into it. I think I can do it from an unbiased perspective, as I did very recently with the Art Tatum release. So anyway, that's what we're going to attempt here, is an unbiased viewpoint on whether this is a worthwhile grab for you on Record Store Day. All right, so let's get into it. So this is 1972 Concert from Avignon, France by the Yusef Lateef Quartet. So there's actually quite a bit of energy lately, I think, from vinyl collectors and music appreciators around Yusef Lateef, because there's been some other releases, other reissues by Kraft. Kraft did, what did they do? They did Eastern Sounds, was it? Or was it Eastern Moods? I get those like mixed up. It's Eastern Sounds. So Kraft put out Eastern Sounds, which was originally put out on Moodsville, and they released it through their original Jazz Classics label. It was also a Kraft small batch, like a year ago. So it feels like even folks who might previously not have been aware of Yusef Lateef are aware of him now. And anyway, so there's probably going to be, a decent amount of energy around this release, my guess, on Record Store Day, and deservedly so. So, 1972, this is not necessarily what I would call, what should I even call it? I don't want to say like his golden age, but it's not exactly his best years. So he, at this point, had, he'd moved to the Atlantic Records label, and he was putting out some stuff that frankly, I don't think was doing as well, or at least in retrospect is not appreciated as much as some of his earlier stuff. However, I think it's, I'll get into whether or not this is representative of his earlier stuff or his later stuff in just a second. So, as I mentioned, this is produced by Zev Feldman, and this was done in collaboration with the Yusef Lateef estate. It's a double LP, 180 gram, and the content has never been issued before, ever, to my understanding. The audio source here, it's been, transferred and remastered from the original concert tapes. I don't know if it was all analog, I'm not quite sure. In the lineup here, we actually have some pretty exciting musicians. We have Kenny Barron, Bob Cunningham, and Albert Tootie Heath, who unfortunately just 2 days ago left us. So very very sad to hear that. But here's I guess a new recording that's coming out that kind of honors honors his memory in retrospect. So this is mono, and it's kind of weird because in the booklet that comes with it, not in the booklet, actually on the outside of the booklet, it has a picture of the tapes, and look what it says. It says stereo. So if this is real, then it's incorrect, right? It's not stereo. Or I'll say this, if it's stereo, it's like really minor imaging kind of stereo that isn't actually separation of instruments whatsoever, because I put it on in with a lot of these, if it's not clearly marked on the outside of it, I have a switch, a mono stereo switch, and I'll go back and forth and try to figure it out. And usually it doesn't take me more than a minute to be or a second to be this is stereo or this is mono. Because it says stereo on it, I was dumbfounded. I was wait, there's no, I don't understand. Anyway, it feels like it's mono to me. And maybe somebody can correct me if there is that kind of really minor kind of imaging type of stereo like you might have heard on some, maybe some early Blue Notes. Okay, so Yusef Lateef, I mentioned about the era and the fact that this is 1972. So where this falls in Yusef Lateef's discography is, it was recorded after one of the several sessions that produced the album called Hush and Thunder for Atlantic. So on Hush and Thunder, Lateef is joined by Kenny Barron, Bob Cunningham, and Albert Heath. Only on like 3 of the tracks though. So there's a couple of sessions that went into that studio album, and they're just on a few of them. And actually, funnily enough, that session hadn't occurred yet when this concert took place. So the only thing I'm really pointing out here is that he was recording with these folks at this time. And so I'm just trying to set that in context. So if you're wondering, though, if any of the tracks on Atlantis Lullaby are from that album, the answer is no. So this is all different content. What I would say about this time period for Yusef Lateef, and specifically the presence of these musicians, is that during this time, Lateef was playing with a lot more of an electric sound. And that's not unusual when you think about what other musicians were doing during this time period. Barron and Cunningham were playing electric piano in those studio sessions, electric piano and bass in those studio sessions for Hush and Thunder, I believe, and at least on some of the tracks. That album, though, had a lot of different styles, is what I would say, from like funk to classical to sort of more experimental. And one interesting note is that Barron's original Sunset, I think it's called Sunset. Yeah. So Barron's original Sunset actually appears on Hush and Thunder, which opens Barron's own album around the same time period on Muse, which is titled Sunset to Dawn. So anyway, all that being said, all of that has to do with Hush and Thunder, not about Atlantis Lullaby, right? But I wanted to give you some context as to what was going on with Yusef Lateef that might advise what we might encounter on this date. All right, so just a couple of more points before we get into the music. So it feels to me like part of the sort of allure of this particular recording is the location where it was recorded. So where that was, and I'm going to butcher the pronunciation, it's something like Cloître des Célestins in Avignon, France. So I'm going to show you here what a picture, or I'm going to show you a picture of what this church looks like. But basically, from what I understand, it was built in like the 14th century. There's 2 trees planted in the center, and it's sort of an open air stage, but surrounded by walls. And according to the venue, at least today, because it is still a venue, it can host about 500 people. So it looks to me, even though it's open air, obviously, like it's as intimate a venue as you might be able to expect, considering that it's outside. So knowing that it's live and it's outside, that automatically is going to trigger in your mind like, all right, what's going on with the sound quality? How does it sound, right? So that's why I wanted to bring it up, and I am prepared to address that as we go through some of these tracks. So speaking of the tracks, and I think it is important to go through them almost one by one because of the sort of shift in styles. All right, so most of these tracks are actually pretty long form. So one of the pieces is 27 minutes long. It takes a complete side of one of the discs. 4 others are around 12 minutes or so or more, and then there's a 7.5-minute piece and a 4-minute piece. So I would say that it's pretty there's a variety, right, of different types of tracks. And again, of different styles as well. So immediately on the opening here, which is the track Inside Atlantis, it's a 12.5-minute track. What you notice is that even though it's a live format, it's definitely not a large festival. And obviously I just mentioned that because it's a 500-person venue, but you can hear that it's not a large festival, and in fact that it's a smaller format. Just you can hear it in the audio. So Yusef Lateef is quite present in the mix. Then in order, in terms of who's present, I would say it's drums followed by piano and bass. Certainly on this opening track, Lateef is the loudest, especially up front. Now, from what I hear as you're listening to this, the balance gets better as the piece goes on. And actually, I didn't notice really any balance issues for the rest of the time. So it seems like maybe just up front they were still possibly dialing in some things, but it's quickly resolved. So this opening track, again, 12.5 minutes, is very much in the post-bop space, and it's really exciting. So I think in contrast perhaps with what Yusef Lateef was recording in studio, especially on Hush and Thunder, this is like really energetic, expansive, again, post-bop, especially with this opening track. Well, and there's a few other areas on this album as well, but we'll get to that. What I notice is that when there is an extended Kenny Barron solo, that's on this piece. It's actually much easier to hear him. So even though up front where I said, oh, you know, who's present in the mix is firstly Lateef and then drums and then piano and bass. Once Lateef is out, like Baron is very, very audible. So I wouldn't think of this as there being like a problem necessarily. Again, it's just something I just noticed a little bit of that balance issue just up front. And certainly whenever Lateef is going to be out, there's going to be a lot more to sort of focus on and to be able to elevate in the mix, I guess, anyway. All right, so that's what I wanted to say about that opening track. So in between tracks 1 and 2, it's kind of fun because you get to hear Lateef introduce his bandmates. He has a higher voice, like a higher pitch voice than I would have expected, actually. And I don't know. Sometimes when you think of like a musician, you want them to like, I don't know, be very. I don't even know what the word is, but like. I don't know. Some of Lateef's sort of aura is he's like a little bit, you know, mysterious and you know, maybe there's like a spiritual aspect or like an Eastern aspect to his music. And then when he just has this like very friendly, like kind of higher pitched voice, I was like, oh, okay, that's what he sounded like. So anyway, I thought that was kind of fun to hear it. So the second piece is one titled A Flower. So this is an 8-minute piano and flute duet. So it's just them. Very different vibe than that post-bop opener. Very peaceful, I would say. Well, in fact, like both the first two tracks are peaceful, but kind of in different ways. It's just, I guess, they employ different mechanisms in order to communicate that sort of sentiment. On this track, I would say, especially in contrast to that first one where there were some balance issues, this one you like completely forget that it's a live performance. It just sounds like it's a studio performance, and I think part of that is because just two instruments, probably in different mics. Although I mentioned that this is in mono, as far as I can tell. But it just sounds like a studio performance. It sounds really clean. You don't get any of this sense of like lost sound anywhere, and you certainly don't hear the audience either. So I thought that was pretty surprising that it sounded as good as it did. The third piece, which is on side B, is titled Yusef's Mood, and this one was actually a familiar one to me because it was recorded on Jazz Mood, which was a Yusef Lateef album for Savoy in about 1957. This is very much a blues-forward and sort of unpretentious piece. So the album, the Jazz Mood version was like 7 minutes. This is 17 minutes. So they really stretch, but you know, and I will say that even though it's not pretentious, and like I said, it's blues forward, as the piece goes, it does, sort of as the piece moves along, it progressively does get a little bit more adventurous, notably with Kenny Barron's solo, which is like all over the place. Not in a messy kind of way, but as in like his hands are just flying up and down the piano. All right, so if you're kind of following me here, and this is important if you're going to try to understand, I guess, what this double album is. So we started with post-bop, we moved to that duet thing, then we did blues forward. Well, track 4 is a flute and bass duet, and it's very Middle Eastern in sound. So again, it's another duet, complete change of tone with the tracks. Track 5 is titled Ebenes, and this actually has, this is blues forward as well, has Lateef kind of vocalizing a little bit while he's playing flute, and that kind of adds an interesting dynamic. Moving along to track 6, this is a standard, so this is I'm Getting Sentimental Over You, which I believe was popularized by Tommy Dorsey. So this one is a little bit of an older one, probably a track or a composition that the audience was more familiar with, perhaps versus some of these others. So Lateef here plays on tenor, and I would say it's definitely the most sort of old school of all the pieces here, but it's still a 12-minute version. And Lateef has a really nice, what I would call a Rollins-inspired solo here, like a Sonny Rollins-inspired solo, which is maybe appropriate given that it's a standard, since Sonny Rollins was such a standards, American songbook kind of guy. And then the last track. So the last track is actually untitled, and for me, it's the standout on the entire double LP. So 27 minutes long, takes up the full side. And I'll say, I mentioned this as a standout. I would say this and that opener, which is post-bop and feel as well. Those are the two standouts. But this last one also post-bop feel, but then shifts into like a Middle Eastern thing initially, with bowed bass acting almost as like a drone. I would say that this is another one that feels more introspective. There is an established rhythm for the most part, but there's also like rhythmic breaks where it's just bass and tenor improvising together in a sort of stop time. Lateef starts into some, I don't even know what actually other instruments that he starts playing, but it feels like he's starting to incorporate some more of what I would expect perhaps from Yusef Lateef, because he was kind of he was known for playing some of these like Middle Eastern and African instruments that perhaps not all of us are familiar with, and it doesn't reference them on the actual cover, so I can't say exactly what they are. The bottom line though is that this last piece that's 27 minutes, it shifts frequently, I would say, in tone. So there's a lot to keep your interest despite the fact that it's the full side length. All right, so why did I take so much time to talk about each of the tracks and the fact that they were like different styles? Well, what I would say is that this feels to me like what you could expect from a live performance that wasn't necessarily made for an album. It's not necessarily meant to be like a cohesive thing. It kind of is something for everyone, is what it feels like what this set list was meant to be. So you do have more adventurous stuff in terms of post-bop, you do have blues, you have old standards, and you have these like instrumental features with the two duets as well. So I would say that it's pretty varied performance that's kind of, I don't know if it's necessarily stepping through time as much as stepping through sort of phases perhaps of Yusef Lateef's career. And yeah, so I think it's just interesting to hear all of these different things. Where I think this live performance and this album, this double LP, shines is certainly in the recording quality. So, this sounds like really great content, but you almost forget that it's actually a live performance until you start hearing some of the clapping. And it's especially surprising considering that not only is it live, it's outdoors, as I led with. So final thoughts on this one. For me, I would have loved, I mentioned that my favorite tracks were the opener and the closer, right? Which are the sort of more post-bop and more adventurous pieces. And fortunately, those take up such a large portion of this double album because they're extended pieces. So you do get a lot of that stuff that I really like. I thought that the blues piece, the one that's like 17 minutes, was a little bit repetitive. So yeah, 17 and a half take of Yusef's mood. But and here's the thing: if I could choose what he played in this concert, it would all be post-bop. But as it stands, it's obviously well recorded. It's a great collection of a variety of styles that Yusef Lateef was playing. It's a bunch of musicians that are at the top of their game. I think that this doesn't stand in for, say, a studio album of Yusef Lateef's. It's a lot more focused. But as it is, as a live performance, I mean, it sounds like it would have been a blast to actually have been at that show. And again, it's kind of something for everyone. You got the standard, you got the blues, you got, the post-bop, you have kind of everything here. And, I don't want to necessarily say that Yusef Lateef was placating his audience as much as much as this is just representative of what a lot of musicians were doing whenever they would be playing, or whenever they'd be touring. In fact, even in the 50s when John Coltrane was touring, I believe that he was frequently touring with like a vocalist, because audiences basically required that you play a varied set so that everybody can feel like there's something for them to enjoy. And so that's what this kind of feels like. Even though there isn't a vocalist that he's touring with, he really is playing sort of across his career and giving everybody a varied set. And I personally think that it's a lot of fun. All right, so bottom line, should you pick this up? Well, keeping in mind everything that I already said in terms of how it's sort of a mix of genres and it's not just one, but also keeping in mind, at least for me, that there is so much of that post-bop, I think it's a pretty exciting release. This thing is $49.98, so that's going to play a role for a lot of folks as well. But I do think it's worthwhile. I mean, I'm the sort of person these days that almost anything that they put out by Yusef Lateef is going to be something that's going to catch my eye, and this did, and I thought it was a great listen. Again, like the biggest thing that I was surprised about is when I was listening to this and then reminding myself this is an outdoor live concert. It was just like kind of mind-boggling. All right, so that's it. Keep an eye out for some of my future videos, and I will see you next time.